Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about rotating exercises to avoid overuse, injury, and inflammation. And this can be multifold in nature, and there's a couple of different times when we might want to rotate exercises. And I'll give kind of examples of both, but I want people to also remember this is for non-novice lifters. Now, what I also want people to understand is that when I say novice lifters now, I don't mean the same thing I meant 5 years ago. Okay, I should probably clarify some of that. That probably needs its own video too. No, if you haven't reached a 315 for 5 squat yet, you could actually be past being a novice. You could be an intermediate already. So I want to make that point clear. Those strength standards, a lot of that data, and I've mentioned before in previous videos, it did get biased a little bit based upon my experiences looking at training logs, things like that. I didn't factor in the 50% of people who dropped out of training and things like that. Okay, so that's something that happens with selection bias and everything else. When I looked at people's training logs running my original novice program, people I've trained in person, and as I've got more and more into coaching and observing more people, I've realized that not everyone reaches those levels. But maybe less than half of people can reach those levels, okay, on a novice program. But you guys know what I mean by novices. If you can still make a linear progression, you're still a novice. And we go to the other extreme. Obviously, look, if you're squatting barely one plate and some change per side for a few reps, you're a novice, okay? Let's be realistic here. You don't necessarily have to be at 3 plates a side to not be one, but you're still a novice if you're squatting a plate and some change per side, unless you are a female. So over to the point. Rotating exercises. Number one, why do we do it? Injury prevention. Now we could talk about stagnation and all these things, but injury prevention is a big part of it. Why? Overuse injuries. Okay. And again, back to the other point, novices need to focus on a handful of exercises, and they need to master them. It's not the same thing. As we get stronger, we start to develop muscle imbalances. We start to develop overuse injuries. We develop these problems. Okay, we are at risk of overuse injuries. One of the best ways to avoid overuse is to rotate movements, because people have this idea when we talk about overuse. Yes, there's an excessive training load aspect, right? There is a training load aspect. Yes, there's a training load aspect in the sense of the work being done on the tendons and joints and everything, but it has to do with the angles and stuff as well. In other words, we can change angles on a movement, and it changes a lot of that, and we know that based upon observation as coaches. In other words, if you're starting to get some minor inflammation that starts in the edge of your pec or your tricep or something like that, in one of those tendons on a closed grip bench press, and we change over to dumbbells, it oftentimes goes away. Now, is a dumbbell bench press and a closed grip bench press almost the same exercise? Yeah, they are very, very, very close. Okay, they're very similar exercises. In fact, they are more similar to each other than they are to a wide grip bench press. And I think anyone who actually trains both correctly knows exactly why. They understand that. They know what I mean. The movement pattern to those two is closer to each other than either one is to like a wide grip powerlifting style bench. Okay, but they're different enough that they change the loading on the tendons. So by rotating through different movements, what happens? We change the loading. We change the angles the tendon is worked at. We change the point in the range of motion where certain tendons get the most stress. We change the way they rub against bones, because most injuries are tendon related. Not all, but the vast majority are. So that's where we start to develop inflammation. That's where we start to get overuse. So if we can change things around like that, we can help with those issues. Now, what I want to state there is that doing 6 different exercises for one muscle group in a week is not going to do that. In other words, if you're in the same workout, and let's say you're doing the exact same 3 movements for your chest every single workout, that's not going to do it. You would actually need to rotate all of them out to avoid the overuse. You would actually need to change every single one of them for another movement eventually. Okay? So the overuse comes from a lot of times repeatedly doing the exact same movement in the loading. And it can be changed. It can be something as simple as going from a barbell to dumbbells. It could be something as simple as changing your grip or your stance. It could be as simple as changing the barbell, right? So like, let's say you're doing squats there. You have access to different barbells. You could rotate barbells. Deadlifts, you can go from sumo to deficit, or sumo to conventional. You can go from conventional to a deficit. You can go to a snatch grip. A smaller exercise, you can go from using a dumbbell to using a cable to using an easy curl bar. You could add reverse bands to a movement. You could add chains to a movement. Any of these things will generally help, right? You're generally going to help avoid overuse injury. So I would say for a lot of more advanced guys, push an exercise about 3 weeks. Push an exercise really, really hard for 3 weeks and then rotate it. Well, what do I mean? Let's say for a main chest and tricep press, you're doing for supplemental work for your hypertrophy. If you're doing a closed grip bench, go to a dumbbell bench. Okay? Change bars. Change the angle slightly. Go to a slight decline for your dumbbell bench, a slight decline for your closed grip bench. Go from a regular bar to a buffalo bar or a football bar. Change it up. Change it up. It's still the same movement pattern. You're still going to stimulate very similar types of hypertrophy. Right? You're going to stimulate very similar types of hypertrophy. It's not like you're going to a completely different movement pattern. Those are all very, very similar movements. Just change them around. And simply changing the implements you use, barbell to a dumbbell or a different barbell. A dumbbell to a cable. Okay, it matters. It will help with that. Sometimes we have overuse so that's related to specific movements that are amazing. I'll give you a perfect example. JM presses and skull crushers are amazing tricep exercises. They are also notorious for causing elbow inflammation. In fact, they generally want to be avoided for anyone who hasn't done significant amounts of work building up your tricep tendons. Which usually we can do with bands and stuff like that. They're great exercises. The problem is they can cause inflammation. So rotating them out is often required for overuse injury purposes. Because you get a movement like that, what you don't want to do is keep doing it. Other problem is that if you don't have alternatives. Now, I've seen this before with, say, a client who has a home gym, and then he can't buy any other alternatives. Well, he doesn't have an alternative. The guy has one barbell. He has no bands. His woman accidentally threw all his bands out, and he couldn't get new bands because of the lockdowns. Well, JM presses start to hurt his elbows eventually. Well, he doesn't have a suitable replacement. It's very hard for him to find a replacement. But if you have bands, you can go to reverse bands. If you've been doing skull crushers, you can go to skull crushers with chains, or you can spend a little time doing a cable press down if you're at a bigger gym. Okay, you can change the movement to get rid of that tendonitis and still work the muscle. It might not be as good of a movement for specifically what you're doing, because it's pretty hard to beat a JM press or a skull crusher for tricep development, for improving pressing strength. Right? They both work the tricep in a way that is extremely useful for increasing pressing. But they also tend to cause tendon and elbow problems over time. So you can't always leave them in for long periods of time. You've got to rotate them out, rotate them around. JM press, you may have to go to reverse bands or go to chains on the bar. And I had someone actually ask me on that, well, why can't you just do bands? Because we don't want to do a bunch of rep work against bands on a barbell. Trust me on this from a recovery end. The reverse bands are going to work a lot better. It's very hard to recover from band work. That's why we do limited amounts of it, even for speed work. And I don't mean little light bands for restoration. I'm talking when you put real band weight over a barbell and you're working in the normal rep ranges. Okay? It's difficult on your recovery. I wouldn't necessarily recommend you do that. Be very, very careful there. And when you do it for speed work, you regulate your volume carefully. But that's what you can do. You can rotate these things around. Okay? We do this to avoid overuse. It's not about muscle confusion. It's about pushing a movement and improving on a movement for a little while and actually getting better. It's about progressing on that exercise. Because we know that we're ensuring muscle growth, we're ensuring adaptation, but then we rotate it out before we get to an overuse problem. Okay? Because that's what we need to do. So when we talk about rotating exercises, this is one of the biggest reasons. Because always remember, if you can continue to push and train without getting hurt, you're going to continue to make gains. If you're starting to get inflammation and injuries that accumulate, that's when gains slow down. And that's a lot of what programming is about. And this is one of the little tips that you can do in your own programming to help stave that off so that you can keep making progress in the long term. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.